for the introduction. And maybe before I start, I would love to also thank BODW for inviting us to speak. And it's such an honor for the 10th anniversary. And also William Toe and Victor Lowe for inviting us. So I'm Marisa, this is Eric, my partner, and it's quite daunting to be up here on the stage speaking in front of such a large crowd. But we are designers and architects based here in Hong Kong with a studio founded in New York City. And our projects today that we'll be sharing actively investigate and integrate architecture with culture and the community directly using arts and technology as a medium. We are often extremely inspired by a local community. This is a butcher based in Mongkok who's been actually kind of roasting the pig's head. And this, as a response to a built environment, allows us to see and observe a lot about Hong Kong as a laboratory and a city for us to analyze and critique, but at the same time provoke. Of course, a lot of the projects based on our work is looking at the urbanism of the city environment around us. And of course, the potentials of Hong Kong, again, as a hyper-density city, offers extreme amounts of provocations and proposals in this hyper-dense environment we situate ourselves in.
But this is Hong Kong as well, and so as part of Hong Kong, we also see that there's a tremendous amount of green space. But we hardly ever see it because in the dense urban areas, you really don't get to see any parks or other systems that really indicate how much of the city itself is green. So this is the type of space that we see. There's this real sharp divide between the green and the nature of the city and also the dense urban spaces. And if we look at a land use map of Hong Kong, you can easily see that a majority of the city is really just open, wild nature. However, in the dense areas of, say, Kowloon, you can never see that because it's basically the built environment. And looking at this, you can see that about 75% is incredibly pure nature, and a very, very small percentage is the built environment itself. So as part of this, we're questioning this divide. Do we need such a sharp divide between what is natural environment and a built environment? And within our own work, we're starting to combine these two together so that we have natural systems that start to co-inhabit. So we're using this project, water from the harbor, to bring it through to cool the building to allow for a much more natural system, to allow for a much more green system as well.
So some of the projects we've done are actually, as we said, propositions and interventions. This is a direct intervention into the HSBC Tower in Hong Kong, inspirational masterpiece for the literature and history and cultural history of Hong Kong. So actively looking at some of the past archives, Norman Foster had wanted to produce a sky garden in the atrium, but here we actually actively intervene, propose, and integrate it into the landscape as a vertical system. Testing these ideas in the Venice Biennale, instead of the HSBC growing productive farmscapes of bok choy and choy sum like for our own climate, here in Venice we were growing it for the Italian diet, such as basil, rosemary, etc. And what's fascinating is some of these projects, we learn a lot from the prototypical testing. Again, growing our own systems. Here is actually the Chinese lantern, which is a very popular plant in Venice. And we actually use this to cultivate our understanding of the climatic conditions. The Chinese lantern with a paper-thin skin of this project really elevates our understanding and producing, we would call, a new type of audience for the projects that we are actually installing in these various Biennale events.
And as architects, we're not just looking as designers for buildings, we're also looking into the built environment in terms of what happens along the side of a highway, say. And this is a proposal for a noise barrier in Hong Kong. And the traditional noise barrier material in Hong Kong is this large-scale acrylic glass. And there's a problem with that, actually, because the birds that are migrating or moving through the city, they actually don't see the glass, and so they crash into it and then they die. And instead of providing these barriers throughout to keep out the noise that actually kill the birds, we're actually thinking about how can we create barriers that invite the birds back into the city. So as part of this, we're really using the greenery of the noise barrier to attract the birds on one side and growing things that they eat, so the berries that they might eat, and bringing their habitat and working with their habitat within the city. While on the other side, the side that faces the road, we're using a special type of moss. And that moss is something that can absorb the CO2 from the passing cars, and it absorbs it at a tremendous rate, much better than any normal plant. And so on one side of the noise barrier is the moss that will absorb the CO2 from the passing cars, and the other side is the plants, essentially. One problem, though, that we are also seeing is that there's not so much integration between different components within the city. So we're also proposing that we're using organic LED lights. And so for these organic lights, what we have is sensors that are built in. So essentially, as the cars move through the city, it lights the way further ahead. Well, when there is no car, the lights dim. So the whole city becomes dimmer at night and less, and more environmentally friendly, essentially. And we're applying that similar concept for the pathways around the noise barrier. So as you move and walk through the city, it starts to light the way more ahead, more intensely. Of course, there would always be some sort of ambient light for safety, but it would actually provide a new environment for this. And what we're actually asking is, are there ways that we can also have the city start to sense the individuals who are in it? So instead of flipping a light switch on and off when you want light, the city essentially knows that you're around it. The city essentially knows that you're there, and that will provide light for you as well, therefore having a more energy efficient city. We're working also on a proposal for a museum in Japan, and as part of this museum, we're also looking into different systems. This one is using liquid crystals in the glass. And during the day, the liquid crystals can completely disappear. You just see through the glass as a normal piece of glass. But at night, you could have the liquid crystals start to turn on. And they're very, very energy efficient and practically use no energy at all. And they just exist within the plane of the glass. And so if you had the ambient light of the room, say someone was working late at night, you could also use that surface of the museum as part of the artwork. And essentially, you could also use it as an environmental saving technique. For instance, in the summertime when it's very hot, that facade could start to turn more white, reflecting the ambient light back into the city, back out into the environment, and reducing the air conditioning costs on the inside. While in the winter, you could do the exact opposite. You could turn the liquid crystals into something dark to help absorb the sunlight into the building, therefore allowing the building to be heated more efficiently as well. Of course, since it's liquid crystal and it's using very, very, very little power to switch between these states, you could have variations through the course of the day. You could start the morning and want to have more ambient light and warm up the space, when in the evening you could actually start to cool down and reflect that space out. So as part of our research, we're also questioning these generic cities that we're finding that are growing up in China. In the last few projects, you could see there's a very unique architecture made out of an architecture that allows for a variable facade, say. But that architecture is being produced with this idea of mass production in mind. And so that those glass panels would work as units, essentially, that you could plug into the buildings. And at the moment in China, what we see is China is housing, over a 20-year span, they'll be housing 350 million people. Essentially, they're housing and providing buildings for all of America, you could imagine, for the same population, over a 20-year period. And the only real answer for that, for those sort of dire statistics that they have to face, is really this system of mass production. And so they're producing building after building and spreading them across the city, and then taking that city and those buildings and spreading them across China as a whole. And what we want to do is start to intersect about how they think about building those buildings in the first place. So instead of building all those buildings out of concrete, which is a very energy non-efficient material, what we're starting to do is really question how we produce these buildings in the first place. And on the market now, just about to be on the market now, is a third generation of photovoltaic cells. And what's remarkable about this as a photovoltaic is that it can actually be used with the ambient light. It doesn't need direct sunlight to be able to work. And it's not quite as efficient yet, but it could be starting to be in place as a building material itself. So as a photovoltaic, it would start to use and absorb the energy during the day. And as part of our proposal, we're thinking about these as building units so that you can use any facade and start to build in this photovoltaics. And if you even change the geometry of the building slightly, you could even maximize. Say on the south facade, you gave a slight angle, you could start to maximize this as an effect. Or you could use the geometry to start to focus on certain solar cells too, to provide even higher impact of energy. And on the left side of this image, you can see the solar cells absorbing the sunlight during the day. And then if we use organic LEDs, which are incredibly energy efficient, at night you'd have a building that really can support itself, that doesn't need the energy taken from coal, or it doesn't need energy taken from oil. It actually is self-sustaining as a building, as its own type.
Yeah, so as Eric mentioned, we are actually really interested in technological advancements and innovation. But a lot of the work we actually should do as designers and architects is also look back at history. Hong Kong itself offers, again, a lot of inspiration. Just say that 75% of Hong Kong is countryside, but at the same time, we have approximately 263 islands, all connected by a water body to Shenzhen, to Guangdong, Zhuhai, Macau, and Taipei. And there's an incredible richness of resources that often as architects and designers or even urbanists we forget about. And this becomes a contentious way for us to propose new types of living or new types of industries and potentially new types of harvesting and using, again, resources carefully. Looking back at Aberdeen, which has a very interesting fishing village and floating platforms and contacts of industries, we are often very much inspired by how we used to work or used to operate, and learning from the kind of local communities. We've been also interviewing members from the area and understanding the histories and technologies and even old crafts of the industries, which are now very tricky because of the overfishing and harvesting of our harbour and waterfront. So with these ideas, we are now trying to, I would say, experiment and provoke the potential of updating models of living and working. And by using our research and design, instead of having islands of lack of connectivity, we are producing aqua industry as towers and structures that are both potentially bringing in new types of artificial reefs, looking at the underground spaces of harvesting and producing, such as this one, which is a pulverized fly ash concrete structure, which becomes the artificial reef building material for abundance of diversity of fish species below as the underground, and then potentially proposing architectural towers and structures as island features to dig into the ground to produce piling structures for thermal systems to both integrate a locality and also the infrastructure itself of the soft and I would say also the hard infrastructure. Again, similar to some of the projects we've done at the Venice Biennale recently in Hong Kong this year, we tested this idea with the aqua industry fountain display integration, where we produced a prototype in the water fountain that immersed these concepts together within the structure of Kowloon Park, growing aquatic plants, which actually are medicinal and also, in one sense, allow a series of types of new growths as a responsive resource back into our own environment. And this is continuing through all our projects. Resource Vitrine itself as a way to collaborate and rethink our role, as what Eric was saying, what is this generic city, or what is the Pearl River Delta, what is actually connected to Hong Kong and beyond. So since 2000, we've been actually steadily documenting manufacturing and factories in China. For example, this one in Hushan, which is operated by 250,000 workers, which also has their own ecology and community. There's a lot of canteens and cafeterias within those structures, questioning how our role as consumers, not only in the commercial world, but also for the locality of farmers and ecosystems within that logic. All this led to a prototype for a new type of factory model, and integrating, again, the ideas that we just mentioned into an installation vitrine for a project called the Resource Vitrine.
And this vitrine was shown in New York City, and so we really wanted to bring across the idea of how someone can view this, especially when all the projects that we were showing were in China. We really wanted to show the idea that the person, even in New York City, had some sort of connection back to the projects that they were seeing. So as part of this, we built the vitrine out of a two-way mirror glass. And when you are at a distance from it, when the viewer was at a distance from that glass, it would say halfway across the room, it would turn into a perfect mirror. But as you walk closer and closer to the space, the light on the inside would turn on, and then you would allow you to see right through the mirror and see into the vitrine. So your own presence would basically make the vitrine react. And as you grow closer, you can actually start to look into the vitrine. We really wanted to have the sense that the person who was viewing it also had this immediate connection and could feel your own body in space. But it's a very simple interaction as you walk closer. This is an interaction that we're looking a little bit more closely at, especially in this project, which is much just happened actually. It's a project that we're doing for Nike. And with Nike, they just developed this new technology, which allows them to essentially knit the shoe together. So it's one thread, and that thread is knit together to form the shoe itself. What's interesting about the technology, though, is that most of the shoe is made from recycled trash. It's actually our own trash that we just throw out. And then they re-knit this shoe to form the new footwear. And what we're doing is creating a new video for this in order to basically express those ideas. We are working with ESKYIU, artists based in Hong Kong as well, for this new interaction design. And instead of a very simple linear interaction, this one is entirely 3D. So if you stand in front of this, you can actually sense your own body, and you can see how it's being knit and actually involves the relationship between the environment around it. And we began to think of new ways that having this and knowing this body in space might actually start to interact with how we design buildings, essentially.
And I have to admit, I mean, often as designers or artists, we forget the discipline. Beyond the discipline, there's always other incredible inspirational models. So the first time ever, I met LeBron James, not knowing who he was, but he actually interacted in that installation as the most incredible basketball player. But anyway, that was a side note of how the interactivity of the project actually allowed to bring other types of audiences together. So as also artists and designers, part of this project was a curatorial effort to be inspired by the 4 tenets of this shoe. We engaged and collaborated, say, with LED artists, Kevin and Teddy Lowe, to bring about how to question our activities as consumers, but also be inspired by the Flynet project, which is a shoe that has 4 tenets of sustainability, lightness, form-fitting, and what's the last one? And basically, what's really great is we curated and worked with 25 young creatives from all around China to come up with questions, debates, discussions, activities based out of this incredible lightweight shoe made out of 100% recycled material, highly innovative, 20 years of R&D to produce, and then did a lot of kind of discussions about our role in society as consumers. We ran through the cities of China, creating digital and analog mappings, thinking about health and society, and also engaged with incredible output with various artists.
So this was a collaboration with LED artists to produce basically light bracelets that would track the motion through space. And so the participants made these light paintings using slow photography, long exposure photography. We also worked with a sound artist based in Shanghai to record some of the sounds at the venue and really challenge their perception of sport. Can we use recycled materials that we find in our everyday use and remake sport from those materials, essentially?
And this culminated into a very exciting installation by Minivis from Taipei, and as a group we came up with an intervention in the Beijing Design Week this October, intervening in an old industrial neighborhood, 751, and it was really nice to actually see the whole creative process exhibited and engaged dynamically with the sound projects, working with, again, other disciplines to create new types of audiences and events, and exhibiting that kind of very carefully. So as I suppose our role, we are actually extremely interested in the interface of all these disciplines. Again, very lucky in 2009 to be selected as curators for the Hong Kong Shenzhen Bi-City Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism, a very long title. And we actually, our curatorial theme was BYOB, Bring Your Own Biennale, and very lucky 2009 to be able to use the West Kowloon waterfront site for a 3-month-long exhibition with co-curators Alan and Frank. We built temporary pavilions out of paper tube for the first time. This is by Shigeru Ban. Worked with younger artists and designers, building farms, testing technologies of the internet cable to actually grow plantation and LED lights, windmills, wind farms, using recycling cartons to produce projects, working with Shubing to educate and work with young children from all over Hong Kong. Again, younger kids to present themselves and join in community events, to new types of experimental music, to activate our waterfront and our roles basically as designers in a built environment. Very important is the Asian society in Hong Kong, building new audiences and bringing new types of personalities and demographics. I suppose everyone keeps saying the 6-year-old is the new 40 today. Everyone's more active, more dynamic, and how do we bring these type of audience to be critical to how we use our environment?
So we had artists such as Casey Wong, who made a paddling home, his own home. A very, very small home, but it's incredible because it had this amazing view out across the harbor. And as we know in Hong Kong, all our homes are outrageously small. I think in the city, over 85% are under 650 square feet of the home, so it's incredibly small, the environment that we actually inhabit. However, how can we maximize this as a housing situation as well? And really, how can we make more comments? How can we use art and technology and architecture? How can we make comments back into the city and use this to be able to send a message, more or less? As part of the Biennale, we also have a farm where we ask participants to help us grow, and they're papier-mâché planters, essentially. And throughout the Biennale, we asked people to harvest them. So everything was edible. You could eat everything within our farm. And at the end of the day, we could take it home with us. We could give each person who helped grow something, basically a pixel to take home with them. So we're giving something back. We're giving something back to the next generation, especially the generation who might not have a garden out in the back and who might live in this very urban, dense, concrete city. So they have a piece that they can take with them, essentially, as well.
And that was just our favorite audience, I suppose, for the 2009 Biennale that came every weekend, and the mother is sitting in the audience. So I suppose to end, we have a final project we want to share with you, which we're really excited about, and it's actually in progress, called the Industrial Forest.
So this is an industrial part of Hong Kong. It's above 3 stories in a building, but an outside terrace. And the outside terrace, although it's 3 stories above the ground, very Hong Kong moment, it also is at the same level as the elevated highway. So we're building basically a bamboo forest right beside the highway. But this bamboo forest reacts to its environment. It's flexible enough to bend in the wind. And also it starts to register what's going on around it. And so this is an image of the local pollution caused by the cars. If there's an intense amount of pollution, serious pollution, the bamboo forest made out of very thin aluminum poles will start to react and glow. Where the perfect air conditioning exists, then they turn blue to indicate that the air is actually safe, clean.
Yeah, so this project is special because it actually situates itself in a neighborhood in Hong Kong that is undergoing rapid transformation. We acknowledge transformation and progress, and we are believers in it, but at the same time we want to respond to that kind of change in a way that could provide questions to our built environment. So the system of metallic poles and actually are dynamic. They are basically inspired by Wangzhoukhang, which is the neighborhood we reside in that's under transformation. So the Wangzhouk is basically yellow bamboo, which is both artificial and natural, kind of cultivated, but also produced with a sort of fabrication technology. And we are laying out a kind of a turf grass, growing out with both artificial grass, but also real grass, and testing that as another kind of carpeting system for the exterior. And we're very, very excited to present this, as it's also close to Aberdeen and all the newly constructing MTR, mass transit railway systems and highway systems. So very much hope you can all see this very soon for a art space in Hong Kong that is also promoting local and international exchange. And I think that's my timer. Thank you very much for coming, and it's exciting for us to share our work actually in Hong Kong for a public audience. It's very meaningful for our practice, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Marisa, and thank you, Eric, for your very interesting, very diversified, very thoughtful kind of strategies to deal with our environment, not just Hong Kong, but across the border to China as well. So it's time to take questions from the floor. Anyone would like to ask a question? Yes.
Your designs deal mostly with concepts that are considered relatively new, be it new technology or new materials. What are some of the challenges that you face from clients, and how do you manage their resistance to change?
We're actually working a lot with manufacturers. So some of the newer technologies, even some we can even talk about today, we're working directly with some of the manufacturers themselves. And so we're really trying to implement change from within. And that's actually exactly the question they always ask us, is how is the best way to actually implement this type of change back into the product? So things like the photovoltaics and things like the liquid crystals, we're working directly with the people who grow the liquid crystals or who make them, essentially, so that we can experiment and try to test these ideas more or less in the laboratory and then bring them into manufacturing later on as well. So by the time we use them in the building, they're actually part of a more established process to test them. But that's a great question, and I think there should be more room for experimentation. Perhaps 1 or 2% of every building should have room for some sort of experimentation, something that you might be able to take out at a later point.
Yeah, I think for us, it's really opening up the dialogue and discussion. We often do get invited to a lot of discussion forums, academic institutions, local community, but it's a matter of finding the right partnerships and collaboration, keeping an open mind. Of course, we're in a very sort of multidisciplinary studio environment, so we seek for those partnerships, but we also are quite firm about who we work with, because I think it's super important as designers using design as advocacy.
Thank you. Yes.
How many of your thoughts have been actually being built, specifically in Hong Kong? For instance, the noise barriers, are they existing? Will they exist? Because it seems that your ideas would wonderfully apply to Hong Kong. I'm still wondering why there are so few buildings here using photovoltaic, and I think you know what I mean about that.
Actually, Hong Kong actually is, the noise barrier was based out of a cross-institutional competition. So we were actually awarded a prize with, I think there were the third prize winners. And it actually was great because that helped the Highways Department and also Institute of Architects, planners, and all the different collaborators to actually have an active farm. Whether it will be built, we don't know yet, but I think Yusho, Vital, and Proving, they actually are implementing some testing themselves and through these competition systems, which we are very happy to be involved with.
Yeah, they never mentioned it to us, although I remember clearly having a conversation with someone from the highways department who asked, is this even possible? But you see it in other cities. You even see it a little bit in Shenzhen. So I knew it was completely possible, and I told him so. And then about a year later, after the competition, we were just driving by and happened to see one in testing phase, just two of them. And so although they didn't interact with us directly about this as a project, at least you could tell that they were listening and that these things were something that could be implemented and that they're experimenting and trying. But I fully agree. There's actually not that, after participating and working within a competition, there isn't always the end result where you can see it instantly built, or that even if you win a competition here in Hong Kong, it doesn't actually necessarily guarantee that your competition winning entry will be built as well. Maybe just the ideas will be implemented in another project.
If anyone here wants to have more of an urban guerrilla moment of infrastructure, we're more than happy to build it for you.
Of course. Okay. Yes, maybe we'll take this as the last question. Okay.
I'm particularly interested in a lot of your strategies that are unique to sort of the urban condition and city life of Hong Kong. Like, for example, in the last project, that sort of urban condition is, I guess, really unique to here. I'm actually from New York, and I'm curious to know how those sort of solutions can be applied in various different cities, whether it's, adapting for climate change or, for the barriers, like what kind of plants can you use in different cities. How do you see the future for sort of projects like that and making them sort of globally applicable?
Yeah, that's a really excellent point. It's something we consider almost in every single project that we're doing. And the reason why we brought up the fact that China is building for 350 million people is that we know that the experiments that we do here and the way of thinking that we're trying to push for the next way of building could have huge impact into these cities, because China often looks to Hong Kong as a model. And if the model that they see is only one of basically a concrete jungle, it presents a very, I'd say, unsuccessful model to be exported into China. And also China, in some way, Asia is at the forefront of these very dense urban environments. And the world is just growing more urban. I mean, only in the last few years, we pushed past the 50% mark, where 50% of all humanity is living in an urban environment. By 2050, that will be 70%. So really, what we're doing now, especially in these urban areas, will have a huge, vast impact about how people think about design, how people think about their cities and architecture. And I think this is the right place to test those ideas, because you can already see in a city like Hong Kong that they were faced with those challenges today. And those challenges will then be faced by other cities in the years to come.
We'll be happy to please take a look at our instant culture book, Architecture and Urbanism as a Collective Process. We've actually outlined some manifestos and propositions that could help reconnect global regional issues but still retain a locality and, I would say, provocation to that. But thank you.
So can the book be available out there, outside?
Sure.
The signature, okay. Yes. Well, this is a very amazing kind of insight for the future development of urban situation around this region. So I think each of us should think deep about this question of how we're going to build this city, and then how we're going to build our environment in a more clever way, okay, more human way. So let's give another round of applause to Eric, to Marisa. Thank you very much.